Welcome to the launch of our strategic plan. My name is Clemens Sedmak. I'm the director of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. Don't look surprised, this was part of our invitation. And obviously we are competing with His All Holiness. So I'm grateful that you made the choice to be here. The two events are not mutually exclusive. You can still attend His All Holiness's event, as will be our Dean. We will launch our strategic plan, and I just offer 7 key words very briefly. One is consultation and collaboration. We worked hard in liaising with our fellows, our stakeholders, the deans, offices, both in the KIO School and in the College of Arts and Letters, with our advisory board members, with our students. So collaboration and consultation. If you look at the plan, it will take you maybe 7 minutes, 35 seconds to read it. You will see that we are interested in humanities in global affairs and integral human development. So the Nanovic Institute would like to bring a sense of humanities into IHD as a main discourse here at the KIO School of Global Affairs. We want to engage, secondly, with big questions, such as colonialism, racism, inequality, climate change from a European perspective. Thirdly, we borrowed Pope Francis's word about the peripheries, which is, we fully understand, a loaded term, but if the Pope uses a loaded term, it becomes paperly loaded term. So we want to invest in exploring the peripheries of Europe in different dimensions. Fourthly, we are interested in the intersection of scholarship and the arts, which was a traditional focus of the Nanovic Institute, and we want to continue with that. And finally, we're interested in the soul of Europe. We don't know what it is. It's an elusive concept, but it's interesting that John Paul II, Pope Benedict, and Pope Francis talk about the soul of Europe. And in my language, it's something like the intangible infrastructure of Europe, the values and the visions and the creativity, the ideas. And so we're interested in that. And today we will have a panel where we'll be also willing to accept challenges and criticisms of our strategic plan. It has a number of challenges, and I could give you 17, but I will leave this to our beloved Dean. I'm very pleased that our Dean of the KIO School, Scott Appleby, is here. He is, as you know, the Marilyn Keough Dean of the KIO School of Global Affairs, a professor of history, and a wonderful supporter of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. Scott, thank you so much for your remarks.
I apologize in advance that I may have to leave a little bit early, even though I hope I can stay for much of the panel. Because I do need to go to a reception, be with the Patriarch of the East. There's been some confusion for those of you who have asked. I'm the Patriarch of the West. So I want to thank all of you friends of the Nanovic Institute and the KIO School for participating in the launch of the exciting new Nanovic Institute strategic plan. When the KIO School was established in 2014, Nanovic was among the institutes asked to adapt to the new landscape of global affairs at Notre Dame by becoming an enthusiastic, energetic, and creative partner and member of the KIO School. Enthusiasm, energy, and creativity, these qualities are possessed in abundance by the Nanovic leadership team, beginning with the director, who is a mission-driven thought leader in the school and champion extraordinaire of integral human development in the school and in the larger university. Professor Sedmak is also an indefatigable scholar, humanist, and master teacher dedicated to the flourishing of our students, not least through their Europeanization. Under his leadership, the Institute and its highly accomplished faculty fellows, drawn from an array of disciplines, have crafted a vision for the next 5 years of the Institute, which both doubles down on the traditional Nanovic strengths and embarks on new initiatives that seem natural next steps in the unfolding and elaboration of the Institute's mission. Among the former, that is, the traditional strengths, one thinks immediately of the engagement with and mentoring of students immersed in all things European. Engagement and mentoring informed by the Nanovic-supported research and scholarship of the faculty fellows and visiting scholars, and one thinks of the Western and Eastern European networks and partnerships forged during Jim McAdams' decisive tenure as director. Among the latter, that is, the new stuff, about which we will hear more this afternoon, I am inspired, I must say, by the ambition to articulate and to help realize a vision of Europe and of European studies at Notre Dame that recognizes Europe as the epicenter of a centuries-long struggle for human dignity. Can societies respect and protect the dignity of each and every person, regardless of ethnicity, race, nationality, religion, political affiliation, or political indifference, regardless of status, of wealth, or poverty? Europe has been and remains the civilizational crucible through which hopeful answers to these aspirational questions and the institutions and laws instantiating these answers have been forged and then at times abandoned and mocked and reforged again somehow with new strength. The instinct of the Nanovic plan to urge the Institute in the next 5 years to, quote, pay special attention to the peripheries of Europe and people on the margins, close quote, seems to me bold, surprising, and exactly right. Right for an institute, a school, and a university that seeks to mark European studies and our students who will study and encounter Europe with fresh eyes and soaring post-pandemic spirits, to mark them with a sign of hope and resilience. No better foundations than the overlooked peripheries for the vibrant intellectual community the plan evokes and aspires to create. Decentering is a risk worth taking, not least when the center is unstable. As deans will do, I've already said too much and given too much away. So let's hear what our esteemed panelists think about the recognizable yet distinctive Nanovic strategic plan. Thank you.
That was moving, right? That was really moving. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. So we have a panel. When I talked to my dean, how should we launch the strategic plan? Can we do a panel? He said, well, that's what sometimes happens. So we'll have a panel this afternoon. It will be a panel with 4 amazing individuals. And I'm really excited because one will be a virtual participant, and that creates an additional layer of nerve-wracking complexity. I will introduce the 4 panelists, and then we'll ask the 3 in-person panelists to come up to the panel and ask Pam to join us virtually. So we have Alison Rice as our first panelist, one of the most enthusiastic supporters of the Nanovic Institute. Alison is Associate Professor of French and Francophone Studies, Chair of the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures, and Nanovic Faculty Fellow. Her new book, Worldwide Women Writers in Paris, Francophone Metronomes, will be published with OUP in January 2022. Alison, thank you so much for being with us. Pamela Bollinger, one of the most generous senior scholars I've ever met. Pam is speaking to us from Freiburg in Germany. She's Professor of History and Fred Cuny Chair in the History of Human Rights, University of Michigan. She has graciously served on the Laura Shannon Book Prize jury for the Nanovic Institute. Her most recent book, published in 2020, is entitled The World Refugees Made, Decolonization and the Foundation of Post-War Italy, and was published with Cornell University Press. Pam, thank you so much for being with us virtually, and it's late at your location. Thank you so much. I was told that you need the mic so that Pam can hear us, which means I don't know whether she heard the applause. So there was applause, Pam. Yes, introducing. Our third panelist, this is where it's tricky to pronounce her name, Magdalena Rajinska-Wojcik. One of the most eloquent colleagues in our Catholic Universities partnership. Magda is chair of the Department of History of the English Language and Translation Studies in the Faculty of Humanities of John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin, Poland, where she also served as dean for 5 years. This semester, Magda is a visiting scholar here at the Nanovic Institute. Her major research interest lies in historical translations of the Psalms, with special focus on prose translations from Latin into Old, Middle, and early modern English. It doesn't get more humanities than that. Magda, thank you so much. And our fourth panelist is Joseph Joey Speicher, one of the most committed European studies undergraduates. Joey is a Notre Dame senior, majoring in political science and English and minoring in European studies. He has been engaged with research initiatives of the Institute, and I've seen how Joey impressed the Croatian Minister of Foreign Affairs, who asked a tricky question. Joey, thank you so much for being with us. Also representing the traditional undergraduate student focus of the Nanovic Institute. So the way this will go, at least that's the plan, we have each panelist go for 5 to 7 minutes to give reactions and responses to the strategic plan. We also told them you have a free field and can be critical and talk about lacunae and can talk about things that we got wrong. And the way I introduce them will be the way of order of speaking. So Alison, then Pam, then Magda, and then Joey. Alison, give us a role model of how it's being done on a panel.
That's setting the bar awfully high. Thank you for this invitation. It is an honor to be here, and I would just like to say spontaneously, immediately, how touched I have been, how inspired I have been by Clemens Sedmak's energy and enthusiasm, by all the focus and vision he has brought to this role and to the Institute. And it is a very exciting time to be a faculty fellow of this Institute, and I'm so honored to speak here today. I haven't planned to be too critical. I wanted to speak from the heart a bit because it's interesting. One of the key words here was turning hearts and minds to Europe. I have found that my heart and mind have both been touched by my interaction with the Nanovic, by all of my work with the Nanovic, and all of the pleasure I've taken from the many, many opportunities to be touched by the Nanovic. So I am grateful for that. The Nanovic Institute of European Studies has been a haven and an inspiration for me since the moment I came to the University of Notre Dame as a beginning assistant professor way back in 2005. It was a concrete place where I could go and find camaraderie and companionship and feel much closer to the continent I had just left behind. Coming from Paris to South Bend, or as I liked to say, from Notre Dame to Notre Dame, meant much more than a change of pronunciation. It entailed a modification of my lifestyle, of course, and while much of this was wonderful, if I ever found myself missing Europe, the Nanovic Institute provided an environment on this campus wherein Europe felt not just close, but present. Major European authors and thinkers, renowned filmmakers, artists and musicians, and others came to Notre Dame to deliver lectures, engage in performances, to spend time in the classroom with students, to discuss with faculty over coffee. And the wonderful staff and administration at the Nanovic Institute not only made these visits happen, but they also made sure that they were inevitably a rousing success. Europeans who had never heard of Notre Dame left enamored, hoping to return. The foremost aspect of the Nanovic Institute that struck me when I arrived over 15 years ago remains a central focus today. And the first goal of the strategic plan reflects an unfailing emphasis on students. As a faculty member of the University of Notre Dame, who has had the wonderful fortune to teach French and Francophone literature, culture, film, art, music, history, politics, and even gastronomy, it has been astounding to see how students have thrived thanks to the opportunities that the Nanovic Institute has made possible for them. They have traveled to the countries of the European Union and studied there, carried out research, learned the language, and immersed themselves in situations that have given them inestimable intercultural competence. They have pursued internships and connected with scholars. They have carried out projects that involved interviews, and they have come up with all sorts of creative endeavors that they have brought to fruition. The Nanovic has done much more than complement their studies here on the main campus of Notre Dame. The Institute, through its support, has enlarged the campus of Notre Dame, sponsoring and planning events at the global gateways in London and Rome, but also at many other locations throughout Europe, making these places familiar to students who will take the in-depth experiential knowledge they have gained with them as they become global citizens with particular expertise in European studies. As a scholar with a specialization in literature in French from around the world, I am particularly enthused by the perspectives of the strategic plan that are articulated through the concept of enlarging the map. It is important for us to be aware that Europe is not limited to the places we see represented most often. Europe is not solely situated in Berlin, Lisbon, Madrid, or Paris. France is present, for instance, in the Caribbean, in South America, in Oceania. Enlarging the map, for me, means recognizing that one of the largest maternity hospitals in Europe is not found on the continent, but on the French island of Mayotte, in the Comoros archipelago, in the Indian Ocean, off the southeastern coast of Africa. Migration here, in one of the 9 outermost regions of the European Union, takes the form of small fishing boats called kwasa-kwasa, whose passengers are hoping desperately to make it across the water to the small bit of land that is officially France and that could just provide a ticket to the benefits of European citizenship. The strategic plan takes this into account, as well as other complexities of Europe today, embracing the challenges of migration and the climate, and recognizing the importance of opening up to translation when the plurality of cultures, histories, identities, and, yes, languages that make up an evolving Europe meet with new forms of identification and expression. Encouraging the deepening of our understandings of Europe within the Notre Dame community, fostering academic discourse and research on European studies on all levels, undergraduate, graduate, and faculty, and strengthening the presence of Notre Dame in Europe are goals inimical to the strategic plan that are inspiring as they promise to engage with big questions such as traditions and beliefs, as well as issues that characterize much of my own research, including colonization and decolonization, Eurocentrism, racism, and inequality. The emphasis on diversity and on the dignity of each individual, of every person, and the profound concern with well-being in line with the Keough School's focus on integral human development is something that resonates deeply with me as a European, as a faculty fellow of the Nanovic, and as a member of the Notre Dame community. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. You're truly a role model. Thank you, Alison. Pam, greetings to Freiburg. The floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Clement Sedmak, for the invitation. And you can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. And thank you to the Institute for the opportunity to join you. And I would also like to laud the Institute for its vision with its strategic plan, which really embraces the notion of decentering the center, as the plan puts it. And I'm just going to share a few slides. Let's hope this works. Just a moment. I'm just going to get the slideshow. All right. Is that okay with everybody?
Looks great.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So this notion of decentering the center points to both the reconfiguration of the role of the Institute, of the center as an institution of European studies, and then to the broader question of reframing Europe in the wake of what we might call the provincializing turn. And I'm just going to briefly in my comments today focus on the question of the peripheries that's so central to the plan, and what that might mean for the Nanovic's mission and programming over the next 5 years. So the explicit framing, as Professor Sedmak noted in his introduction, comes from a powerful center. That is, it comes from the Vatican and from Pope Francis's call to attend to peoples and places on the margins. And I'd like to encourage all of you at the Institute to really go further in decentering this very notion of peripheries, thinking about peripheralization as it's conceived, understood, lived, and challenged by those who are on the peripheries or who are seen as peripheral populations. So a moment ago I used this phrase, the provincializing turn, and I was referring in part to Dipesh Chakrabarty's very influential epistemological critique of Europe in his book, Provincializing Europe. In adopting the language of provincializing, I highlight Chakrabarty's call to puncture European claims to universality by examining how such ideas were, quote, drawn from very particular intellectual and historical traditions that could not claim any universal validity, end quote. And this critique echoes in the work of many other critical thinkers, and here I've just highlighted Roberto Dainotto in his Europe in Theory, in which he starts from Italy, Europe's margins, and site of the first Southern problem or question, which is a precursor of sorts to the very idea of the global South, to decenter the notion of Europe. Or we could also refer to Achille Mbembe's 2017 critique of Black Reason, whose opening salvo declares, quote, Europe is no longer the center of gravity of the world. This is the significant event, the fundamental experience of our era, and we are only just now beginning the work of measuring its implications and weighing its consequences, end quote. So as historians Sonia Levson and Jörg Rukwate put it in their essay, Why Europe? Which Europe? That introduces a lively set of debates about contemporary European history as a field of research. The kinds of critiques that I've just highlighted open up a space for scholars to focus on internal provincializations that include, as Levson and Rukwate put it, quote, the deconstruction of normal and special paths and implicit teleologies, as well as a critique of narrative structures based on notions of a norm and deviation from that norm, end quote. And these are the kinds of means, for example, by which places like Eastern and Southern Europe, where I work, have historically been constituted as spaces of exception in regards to Western and Northern centers. So I'd encourage all of you at the Nanovic and others interested in these questions about the status of European history to look at this blog that I put the link here for, because it includes several contributions that are addressed to what it means methodologically to write transnational European and even global history from the margins. And I think many of the insights there about the margins and peripheries could be expanded to European studies writ large. Certainly, if we look at titles of recent works from scholars of Bulgaria, here I'm highlighting Kristin Godsey's Second World, Second Sex, Socialist Women's Activism and Global Solidarity During the Cold War, Theodora Dragostinova's The Cold War from the Margins, A Small Socialist State on the Global Cultural Scene, and Maria Todorova's The Lost World of Socialists at Europe's Margins. All of these underscore how scholars are reimagining Eastern Europe, using its putative peripherality as a region long understood as depicted as backwards and isolated to open up a whole set of productive connections within and beyond Europe. So I'm eager to hear more in this discussion, and then as the plan unfolds, about how Nanovic's big questions relate to questions of knowledge production and the status of Europe and Europeanness itself, and what the ongoing unfolding consequences of Europe's decentering, how this relates to the big questions. Now, as part of the plan's goals 3 and 4, I'd be excited to see programming and engagements with those such as artists and activists who are addressing these questions from the ground up. So this might include linkages between Nanovic, Notre Dame's undergrads and grads, and initiatives like those of the indigenous activists who called upon Pope Francis to revoke the papal bulls of discovery. Or involvement with groups like the Black History Month Florence, co-founded by artist Justin Randolph Thompson, or projects like those of photographer Mario Badagliacci's Moors of Sicily portraits. There's obviously a rich field of art and public art projects connected to the questions of social justice, dignity, and human rights that are so central to the strategic plan. And I think these could be brought in really interesting ways into the policy conversations that the strategic plan also highlights. So again, this is just to encourage all of you to think about peripheries imagined and reconceived from the bottom up and within very broad transnational frames. And having seen those slides at the beginning of the presentation, I see that the wealth of projects and resources that the Nanovic has in place to draw upon in realizing these goals. But on a much more prosaic level, privileging peripheries also means, as part of Goal 1, encouraging students to study and funding their research in places other than the historic centers, and here I'm echoing the previous speaker. So encouraging students to go to Marseille rather than Paris, Trieste rather than Rome, Lesbos rather than Athens, and building strategic partnerships with institutions in those places. For those engaged in graduate training, it also means reckoning with the fact that the provincialization of Europe has meant that European studies are often a tough sell, especially in the North American job market, particularly in the humanities fields like history or comparative literature. So I'm wondering if there might be possibilities for creating a postdoctoral fellowship for recent Notre Dame PhDs in European studies who are working on one of those big questions, because we obviously have these ethical commitments towards our grad students, and it is a very challenging moment for the European studies job market. From another direction, what about initiatives that expand the circle of who engages with European studies and thereby broaden the confines of European studies? And as a model here, I'm thinking of something like the Terra Foundation affiliated, I did have another slide, well, it's okay, fellowship at the American Academy in Rome, which brings scholars with primary expertise in American art and art history to work with relevant collections in Italy. And this fellowship was recently held by Professor Gloria Bell, who studied the work of 19th century indigenous artists who lived in Rome, including the sculptor Edmonia Lewis, whose roots were both Afro-American and Native American. So to conclude, as I hope I suggested in these comments, the issue of peripheries and margins that are vital to the Nanovic plan really tap into state-of-the-art scholarship and scholarly questions within European studies and important political projects around social justice. So I'm very excited to see how the Institute will ask big questions and develop programs around these issues in the next 5 years. So thank you again for the opportunity to comment on this.
Thank you. And thank you so much also for the homework you have given us. I was always one of those students who loved homework. At the beginning of the strategic plan means we need those kinds of tasks to be able to creatively engage with our own strategic plan. And we'll liaise with you, Pam. Without you, this wouldn't happen, I'm afraid. Thank you so much. Moving from Freiburg back to South Bend, Magda.
Thank you. Thank you, Clemens, for inviting me. Thank you all for listening, for being eager to listen. Clemens, I'll try to stick to the time limit. I negotiated, I wanted to talk to you for 90 minutes. Clemens wouldn't agree. But this is the minimum amount of time I would need to speak my heart out, really. But there I am. So I've been invited to speak here today as a visiting scholar, participant of the Catholic Leadership Institute, and member of the Catholic Universities Partnership, which means I should be given triple time. These three programs, which relate directly to Goal 3, page 12 of the program, are intertwined in my case, but each of them has its own individual independent significance, so I'm going to address them individually, separately, to accentuate that. Also, I represent here a very large group of beneficiaries of these programs. So I've contacted my colleagues in Europe and also those who are with us here today, Svitlana Kryovsky and Sarota Molnar. I've asked them to share their thoughts with me so that I can enrich my personal experience with that more general perspective. So what I'm going to say, you will also hear their voices. Let me begin with the visiting scholars' perspective. I first came to Notre Dame in 2017. The time spent here was the most intense and fruitful period in my academic career. It brought two important effects, two outcomes. First of all, the most important, immediate, desirable outcome of a researcher's work is a publication. And here in Notre Dame, I wrote a paper which was both important and challenging for me. I plucked up courage, backed it up with research, and just did it. And of course, I later wrote more papers that were based on the materials I gathered here. But that first publication was important because I rose to the challenge, empowered by the genius loci of Notre Dame. And what is this genius loci in the eyes of the visiting scholars? Here is what they say. All my colleagues speak of impressive library with an efficient interlibrary loan system, opportunities to collaborate with the faculty of Notre Dame, who are always eager to meet with the visiting scholar of the Nanovic Institute. This is true. It opens hearts and doors. Genuine networks which start up here, continue beyond the stay, and produce concrete results. They also speak of stimulating atmosphere, perfect working conditions, including an office. They all mentioned coffee and snacks as well. And the pervading feeling that we're all welcome here. Each and every one of us felt special in the friendly atmosphere of the Nanovic Institute. Thank you. The second outcome of that visit relates to the fact that I was then Dean of the College of Humanities, and because my time here was so inspiring, I resolved that my faculty members deserve that too. In the next 4 years, 4 scholars from my faculty came subsequently to Notre Dame. Each of them fell in love with the place. But as Dean, I followed up on their research, and the boost in their outcome was so pronounced and too visible to have been coincidental. One final thought concerning the overall relevance of the visiting scholar program. As I've said, the opportunities a scholar encounters here are fabulous. But there is another aspect of a high order which makes the visiting scholar program so important. It is related to the position of scholars from Eastern and non-Germanic Central Europe on the wider European scene. There is a glaring asymmetry in the status of scholars from that part of Europe with respect to the scholars from the rest of it. This is naturally a legacy of communism which has left its trace not so much on the advancement of scholarship and its quality as on the visibility of Eastern European scholars on the wider scene, and hence their ability to make important connections, and also for their research to find the academic resonance it deserves. We could discuss that for a long time, but I just want to emphasize that the Nanovic Institute has been providing both a climate and a frame for bridging this divide. The extraordinary potency of the efforts of the Nanovic follows from 2 factors. One of them is derivative of the position of the US scholarship and its high esteem in Europe and worldwide. The other one has to do with the prestige of the Notre Dame University itself. In effect, a scholar from post-communist Europe who makes new academic connections via their temporary affiliation with Notre Dame stands a much better chance of setting up valuable academic cooperation. It is simply easier, and we have all experienced that, to set up, to foster and sustain such relationships, even within Europe, via the US hub, which the Nanovic Institute offers to all of us. So it appears that the surest and shortest way from Eastern and Central Europe to Western Europe is via Notre Dame. Now, this takes me on to my second role as the participant of the Leadership Institute. The Nanovic is a meeting place for European leaders. This sounds like a metaphor, but it's not. It is here that I met my colleagues from Catholic universities in Europe. And we discovered that while we feel on the peripheries in our home countries as leaders of Catholic universities, we are all in the center here. And this is what makes it unique. We exchanged our experiences, reviewed our working strategies, and validated our raison d'être. The big why, which each of us needs to actualize every day. I made sure my faculty members applied to participate in the program, and they did. 2 of them are now Dean and Vice Dean of my college, as of yesterday. And finally, there is the Catholic Universities Partnership, which has come of age this year, having been founded in 2003. This, for me, was a continuation of the ties that were set up here in Notre Dame. I joined the CUP conferences in 2018 in Lviv, where I first met Clemens, and I continue to attend, as you can predict. Each of these meetings is devoted to a theme that we all consider important, both within our universities and as part of the mission that we feel that as Catholic universities we need to pursue outside our strictly educational curriculum. Each conference gathers people who have common goals and who wouldn't have met without the framework that was proposed here in the Nanovic, where ideas grow into actions. All of this illustrates the relevance of Goal 3, page 12, of the strategic plan, both for individuals and on a much wider plane. Most importantly, still, what I have said shows that this is not only part of the strategic plan. It is a living program, powered with the beating heart of the Nanovic team. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you so much for reminding us of the importance of relationships in academic life. My inaugural lecture in London, back then in the days, 2005, was Happiness in Academic Life. And the idea was, without friendships, intellectual friendships, you cannot be a happy person in academia. It's difficult even with the friendships we are. So thank you so much, Magda, for reminding us of our mission. Joey.
Hello, everyone. I suppose I should begin by thanking everyone for the invitation to speak here today. It's truly an honor to be asked to be the undergraduate representative on this panel, so I thank you for the opportunity. When I first read the Nanovic Institute's new strategic plan, the phrase that immediately jumped out to me was turning hearts and minds to Europe. At least in my case, my heart and my mind have both been turning towards Europe for as long as I can remember. Whether it's through my love of history, politics, literature, or even something as simple as waking up early on the weekends to watch European soccer, it's always been very important to me. I think this passion really crystallized when I was in high school. Unlike many students in the United States, I went to a high school that supported the International Baccalaureate program, the IB program. I suppose as the name maybe gives away a little bit, this program is truly focused on educating students through an international lens. And so one of the most powerful experiences, I think, during my time in this program was I had the opportunity to take a US history course, but it was taught using a European curriculum. This was really, really important to me because I feel that growing up in the United States, I knew US history fairly well. But learning it through the perspective of a European curriculum, I realized how much of it I really did not know. And so this really crystallized and drove my passion to Europe, and that is a passion that has continued during my time at Notre Dame. I first came across the Institute, I suppose it would be at the beginning of last academic year, so about a little more than a year ago. At this point, I was a third-year political science student that, quite frankly, didn't really have much direction in life. I knew that I liked politics, I knew that I liked Europe, but I didn't really know what to do with that. I was looking for summer opportunities, and the political science department put me in contact with Anna Dolezal. And around that same time, I received a flyer for a new course that the Nanovic Institute was offering, the inaugural European Context course. This was a course where a one-credit course that met once a week, and we'd have the opportunity each week to listen to a lecture given by an expert on Europe on various key issues the continent and indeed the world face. This course was absolutely a wonderful experience, and after going through this, I knew that I wanted to get involved more fully with the Institute. Since becoming involved with the Institute, I've had the absolute pleasure to work on 2 student-led research program projects. Over the previous winter, we worked on a quite ambitious project, I should say, trying to capture the European response to the 2020 US presidential election. That was absolutely wonderful. And then over the summer, I was fortunate enough to work as a researcher on a project focusing on the accession of the Western Balkan states to the European Union. That was a truly wonderful experience as well. I think the Nanovic's programming has really appealed to me because as I study political science, and that's my first major, but I also am an English major. And a lot of people are taken a little bit aback when I say that. For some reason, they don't think that political science and English go together very well, which to me has always seemed a bit strange, but yeah, I suppose it's not as common as I'd like. But the Nanovic Institute really has given me the opportunity to pursue both of those passions. I've had both political science and English courses count towards my European Studies minor. And I think one of the truly incredible things about the minor is that it allows me to pursue Europe through an interdisciplinary lens, which has been truly wonderful. In terms of the strategic plan, I have to say I'm very, very excited to see the direction the Institute is taking going forward. Particularly noteworthy, I think, was the focus on the peripheries of Europe. I think that my time with the Road to Europe project, the one that focused on the Balkans, I think really demonstrates the importance of focusing on the peripheries. So, as I'm sure most of you in this room know, the Balkans exist. They're part of Europe, but they're not truly of Europe, I think would be a fair description. A number of the Balkan countries are in various stages in terms of the process of joining the EU, but are not quite there yet. And our job as researchers was to analyze each country, see how close they were, see what they needed to do, and then try to draw some conclusions on how feasible accession would be in the near future. This was really, really impactful for me because I focused on an area of Europe that I personally didn't know too much about, but is also, I think, exists, like the strategic plan says, at the peripheries a little bit. I think that focusing on regions like this and focusing on people like this can be a really powerful experience because the future of Europe is in these regions, and the ability of these regions to accede to Europe will ultimately determine the region's health in the future. Likewise, I am proud to say that I just returned from a week in Germany. I was awarded a European Nanovic Institute grant to study for a week and do research for my senior thesis, and I think that this program and this opportunity was really valuable for me personally because, well, I am one of the many students that has had the unfortunate experience of having study abroad dreams be dashed by the pandemic, and so I think over the last year or so I've been accepted to 4 different study abroad programs, 2 summers and 2 semesters, and all of them have been canceled due to COVID, so I had sort of resigned myself to maybe traveling to Europe as an undergraduate student wasn't in the cards, but I am so fortunate to be able to say that I did have this opportunity when I least expected it. And during my time in Germany, I spent several days in Berlin, but also several days in Leipzig. And I'm not going to sit here and say that Leipzig is at the periphery, so it's a fairly major city with a long and distinct history, but it was, I think, for me important to get off the beaten path a little bit and to get to talk to people and individuals that maybe don't interact with people from the United States every day. I got to meet with a lot of cool people while I was there in Leipzig and in Berlin. But in many ways, the most powerful and impactful experiences were the individual conversations I'd have, even if they only lasted a minute or 2. Those were the ones that really made my time in Europe worthwhile. Before I close, I think I would be remiss not to mention a personal anecdote, which I've been thinking a lot about since I was asked to speak here today. So I suppose around the end of the last academic year, I was talking to my roommate and close friend about, well, we were trying to take stock of the previous year and all the experiences we had been through. My roommate mentioned that he felt that we didn't appreciate our freshman and sophomore years sufficiently. He felt that, and I suppose this is fairly typical among classmates who began their college experience before the pandemic and will graduate in the midst of it. But I have to say that I quite strongly disagree with this perspective, this idea that the best was in the past and that everything had been downhill since March of 2020. Despite how weird everything was, I felt that last year and continuing on to this year, this was the time when I began to come into my own and blossom academically. And I truly mean it when I say I think that my experiences with the Nanovic Institute are the reason why. For the first time, ever since I began working with the Institute, I felt that I was part of an academic community where I truly belonged. It's one that energizes me and excites me and truly makes me happy. I had finally found that community that I really craved since starting college. I feel like it's where I feel like it's where I was meant to be. And so, at least for me, my college experience has only really taken off since the pandemic began. And I feel that I'm quite fortunate to say that. I received emails from the Institute about all the cool things that they'll be offering in the future, and I read the strategic plan, and I'm so excited about the direction the Institute is taking. It breaks my heart a little bit to know that I won't be able to personally participate in all the cool things that are being offered in the future, but the fact that they are being offered and the fact that there are so many cool things on the table really shows to me that the Nanovic Institute is in the right place and is in very good hands. I am privileged to have been one of the first to experience some of Nanovic's new offerings, such as the European Context course and the student-led research experiences. And I'm really excited to see how those opportunities develop in the future. I really mean it when I say that my time with the Institute has been, without question, the highlight of my college experience, and indeed my greatest blessing. I am so thankful for everything the Institute has given me, and I can't wait to see what the future holds. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, Joey. You should have seen how Anna looked at you like a mother on her beloved son. She is too young to be your mother. Thank you for reminding us of conversations and community. We have about 20 minutes for Q&A. Let me just make a few remarks before we enter the floor. You can think about a question or a comment at this point. I have just 3 remarks. One is, you may wonder why we didn't prepare a nice PowerPoint to introduce the strategic plan and the 4 goals and the 3 sub-goals. And we have, by the way, 4 sub-goals for each sub-goal. And we decided, well, it's a short document. Please read it, and the panel contributions, I hope, have whetted your appetite, and you got the main ideas of the strategic plan through that method. Secondly, Bob Nanovic himself was in town last weekend, and he visited our institute on Tuesday. And after the visit, I should say, when I met him first, he talked about students like Joey as the kids he wants to support. And after his visit to the Institute on Tuesday, he told me, you have really nice kids working at the Institute. So, Monica, welcome to the club. So we have our paternal main benefactor watching over us, and he's also very pleased with the direction we are taking. And as you may know, his main vision is to help undergraduate students develop a love for Europe, and that's what we want to continue to do. And my third and last remark is, I spent fallback not in Germany, but in Austria and Bulgaria. So when Pam mentioned, why don't you go to Marseille rather than Paris? I thought of, yes, why don't you have an Austrian as the Nanovic director rather than US American? That's already decentralized, kind of, coming from the peripheries. And I was in Bulgaria for 3 days to explore our new partnership with Caritas Bulgaria in Sofia, where we want to have undergrad students spend 2 months in the summer in a service learning kind of capacity. And it was so gratifying to see how pleased the Caritas colleagues were about the partnership, about the prospect of working with us, having brilliant students like Joey and your siblings. So that was lovely. And with this, I would open the floor. Maybe, Alice, would you like to react to what you have heard? You have always something useful to say. In the meanwhile, think about a good question or footnote. And then I would also ask Pam whether you have a comment on what you have heard, hoping that you could follow the conversation with the mics. Alice.
Well, that's interesting. Another contemplation of Europe, and I love the way so much of our comments dovetailed when it came to getting off the beaten path, to going to other locations in Europe that we're less familiar with. I really appreciated the comments on the peripheries that we're often not attuned to, and also peripheries in a large sense, the Eastern European countries that are often overlooked in favor of the West. And these preferences, I think these polls and these drives are so very interesting. I have completed a project of interviews with a number of women who have come to Paris and become writers of French, and many of them are from different European countries, which is quite interesting. Many of these writers whom I've interviewed, wherever they are from, whether from Europe or from elsewhere, have often indicated that their hearts are with Europe and not with France. And so they've taken up residence in France. They're in the very heart of France in many, and almost all occurrences. They're living in Paris, but they say, I feel European. And that means something particular for the Slovenian writer and the Bulgarian writer in my study, and then the woman from Denmark, that means something different. But it means something quite different for those, of course, from outside Europe. And to migrate, to immigrate to a location in Europe, and not to feel necessarily an affiliation with the country within Europe where you find yourself, but to identify much more largely with Europe as a whole. I think it's a very interesting move. I think it's something rather recent, relatively recent we might say, but I think the Nanovic is right there, looking at Europe as a much larger entity than nationalist entities. And at a time when nationalism has poked its head in various countries, this is an interesting, deep connection that many have to Europe. So that's just something I was thinking about as well with all of these comments about different locations in Europe. It's an interesting phenomenon at present.
Thank you so much, Alison. Pam, do you have anything to comment on?
Yes, let me just add that, I mean, it's really been very interesting hearing the panelists talk about the academic community at the Nanovic. I've had, as Grant said earlier to me, several near misses because of the pandemic of actually being able to come to the Institute in person, and I look forward to that experience. And it's certainly making me sorry that I haven't had the chance yet to come, but I think it sounds like such a vibrant place. And also, I think what Magda said about visiting scholars, I think there's a lot of places and fellowships that visiting scholars often come and feel quite isolated. And so your experience of the Nanovic, I mean, really speaks to the sense of community and kind of caring, for people coming from a different system and coming from outside. And experiencing that. So I do look forward to having the chance to visit someday soon, hopefully, in person. But also, I think thinking about, the remote and virtual options. I mean, this goes a bit to what Joey was saying about his experiences. I mean, this is also an interesting way that peripheries have been overcome in this last year and a half, right? That many scholars and students who might not have had opportunities to participate in things that were only in person, either in a European center or a US university, now with a Zoom, are full-fledged participants. So, also thinking about the format of your programming as you go forward, and ways to include people who might not otherwise have participated. And just finally, to Joey, I really like what you said, that the future lies with the countries that are either new recent members of the EU or hoping to be. As someone who's worked not just in Italy, but in the former Yugoslavia, in Croatia, I think that this is really an important insight, and in your experiences at the Nanovic sound wonderful and fascinating, and I wish you all the best in your future.
Thank you, Pam. Just yesterday we had a virtual panel on the German elections 4 weeks after with 2 German experts who were zoomed in, so there are all these new possibilities. And you have a standing invitation to the Nanovic, as you know, Pam, just when you return safely from Germany. Any comments or footnotes from you who are physically here in the room? We need at least 3. Yes, Tom, please. Greg is coming around.
Oh, yeah. Hi. Thanks to all the panelists. I would like to hear some comments about a non-geographic understanding of periphery. Most of the comments have been about periphery as geographically understood. The Balkans, Eastern Europe, Italy, Spain, not the West. And that makes sense, but inside, you can find peripheries in Paris, and we all know. I don't think anyone would disagree with what I've said, but I'm just curious to hear them talk about the other kinds of peripheries that will be part of the Nanovic agenda.
Thank you. That's a great question. Who wants to take this great question? Magda, and then Alison, and then I'm sure Pam.
Well, I'll just answer briefly. As I said in my presentation, European leaders of European Catholic universities, we feel on the periphery in Europe, because in each of our countries there is 1, 2 Catholic universities. Mine is old, but most of these universities are quite young in post-communist Europe. And we feel on the periphery to a great extent. When we came here, this was the center. This is definitely not a geographical definition of periphery. This is a periphery that is less significant or is different, and by being different is in a way stigmatized. And this was destigmatization. This was showing that we belong together, that we are a community, and that this community can have a common voice, and that we matter. Thank you.
Yes, a very rich question, of course, within the French context, and we even have the périphérique, which is right around Paris, and certainly the périphérique keeps some peripheries outside of Paris, but not necessarily. Very, very complex question. I think right now in France, as here, we are looking at movements akin to Black Lives Matter. We're paying attention to those who are disabled in new ways, and certainly questions of race, gender, and class are all coming together in intersectional ways that are very important. So many who could be considered at the periphery of society and have been treated as such, I think are now moving in new ways to be seen and heard, and certainly that is what I hope to do in my teaching and research, and work with the Nanovic as well.
Thank you, Alison. Pam, any comments on the non-geographic understanding of peripheries?
I would just second what Alison said, that certainly, I mean, in my presentation, we didn't have a lot of time, but I hope to imply also that it's really important to think about groups or populations that have been peripheralized. So some of those initiatives that I pointed out, such as Black History Florence, right? I mean, Florence certainly is a center, but having students think about different experiences and understandings of a place like Florence, or the experience of indigenous artists in Rome, for example. And I think Clemens has been involved in the Humanitarian Corridors Project in Rome, working with refugee populations. So I think very much that the peripheries need to include these understandings and these experiences.
Thank you so much. And I think in the strategic plan we did talk about languages, cultures, traditions that are threatened, and so we want to explore the roads less traveled also in terms of topics, I think. Joey?
I suppose I touched on this briefly during my remarks, but as I said, some of the most impactful experiences I had during my week in Germany were maybe the little conversations I had, the 30 seconds, 1 minute, however long they may be, and maybe they won't end up making it into the final copy of my senior thesis, but in terms of personal impact, I think that they're incredibly important. As I'm sure most of you know, Germany has a large Turkish population, ethnic Turkish population that is, and I went to a number of Turkish restaurants or Turkish ice cream shops and things like that, and the little conversations I got to have with people that work there, for example, where are you from, how long have you been here, how long has your family been here, things like that, I think really shed a lot of light on German society and the way that Germany has been able to incorporate groups in terms from the Middle East, the Turkey in the Middle East and whatnot. I think that those little conversations that I had were really, really impactful for me. And I think that in terms of when we think about maybe not people at the geographic peripheries, but in terms of demographic peripheries, I think that they can go a long way into helping us overcome some of those barriers and bring those people in from the peripheries.
Thank you, Joey. You know, you can do a lot in 30 seconds in those small conversation snippets. Will you marry me? Yes. Yes. Sure, please.
I'm not sure I can follow that one.
I didn't ask this question specifically to anyone in the room.
Right. No, but you then looked at me, so. Okay. So, I just wanted to point out, I think there's a hidden, less recognized dimension to the strategic plan here and thinking about peripheries. And part of that is one under which, when we conceptualize peripheries from a non-geographical standpoint and recognize the importance of thinking about sort of core periphery centrality in terms of political and historical context of Central Europe, Eastern Europe, these kinds of framings. But I think the other big one that exists in here is that of rural versus urban, and peripheries vis-a-vis that of, as Tip O'Neill said, all things are local. And one of the components to this is when we move away from this bigger agenda of the EU as an experiment, when we move away from that of the kind of national conversations that take place, when we move away from that of the cities of Paris, Leipzig, whichever example we think about, we're intersecting with other questions that are fundamental to these countries, to these places. And I just would encourage the Nanovic, to be fair about this, they have sponsored some work by myself recently to try and explore some of that through film. But I would encourage those continued conversations about the periphery as also something that involves the rural and involves the kind of very different views, the very different cultural context that exists as a foundation in many ways, both ideological but also that historical and cultural within those countries. So I just put that on the table.
Thank you so much. And that also ties well with the integrated human development theme at the Keele School of Global Affairs, where the urban-rural divide is very important. And we take IHD to mean the development of each person and the whole person, and especially the most disadvantaged ones. Because a lot of development work happens in the urban centers with urban-placed experts, and so that's a very good point for us to consider. Before I ask the panel to respond, any other footnotes or comments or questions? Criticisms, challenges?
There's a question on Zoom.
Is there a question on Zoom, Grant or Tim? Under the Q&A there is one.
So the question on Zoom was related to where to find the strategic plan, and it is available online. And perhaps my colleagues can put the link in the chat.
Yes, and of course there are also physical copies for those of us who are old-fashioned like me and like to have something tangible. Great. Think about another question. We have about 5 more minutes. Panel, would you like to respond to the rural-urban divide? When I don't know what to say, I always say, oh, Pam. Pam, could you say something to the rural divide?
Sure. I think it's a really important point, and I'm sorry I can't see the colleagues who are posing the questions. But I think right. I mean, in many places too, in Central and Eastern Europe, I mean, the rural actually occupied a very important sort of symbolic role, right, in the national imagination, different than, for example, in a place like Italy. So there's a rich history there to unpack. But then also when we think about the kinds of debates about sustainability, about organic farming, different kinds of mutual aid projects and cooperatives. I mean, I think here too we see rural spaces that are being revitalized or with the potential to be revitalized, and a lot of great opportunities that I can imagine for students with internships, right? Also coming from, I know that the Nanovic has a focus on the humanities, but this is something that we often encounter at our university, is that the science students, they have very structured majors and they think like, why would I go and do study abroad in Europe? And I think there's a lot of really interesting agronomy questions and so on, as well as other biological, marine biology possibilities for science students to go to Europe, and whether it be on an internship or a course. So I'm going a bit off of the rural, but I think that that's an important dimension of the education function, is to really try to create possibilities for students who don't typically do the study abroad.
Thank you, Pam. We did sponsor biology students to do biology studies in Malta and things like that. So we are open to anyone. And our provost is really interested in science and engineering. And so that's where the Nanovic will also try to be supportive in the future. Any other insights from the panel before we come to a close? So what I heard is enlarging the map. I heard provincializing Europe. I heard meeting place and relationships. I heard future of Europe through the peripheries and the role of conversations. Any final comments? Maybe that's what we do now, since there are no more comments from our beloved audience. No? Everybody has a last say. We start with Joey, go via Magda to Alice, and then Pam, of course, has the last word. Zoe.
I suppose I'm a bit out of my depth when discussing the rural and urban divide. So
you can talk about anything, like closing the mind.
Sure. So maybe I'll avoid that subject and let my fellow panelists approach it if they desire. I suppose maybe to just reemphasize the transformative experience that the Nanovic Institute has had for me as an undergrad. My only regret in my time with the Institute is that I did not have more time. In fact, my brother recently started his time here as an undergrad, and my mom was asking me for advice that I would give him, and one thing was, what do you wish that you had known about earlier? And the answer, of course, was the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. I am so grateful that I have had the time that I've had with the Nanovic Institute, and of course I wish that I had more, but I'm just thankful for the time that I had. And like I said earlier, I see the strategic plan and I see all the offerings that the Institute has on the table, and I am just so excited about the future. Even though my time at the university may be coming to an end, the Nanovic Institute will always be close to my heart, and I'm so excited to see what the future holds.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's amazing. In the middle of the semester, you can still talk about the end is coming near. There are many more exams before you graduate, but we wish you all the best.
Okay, I've been to many strategic meetings, launching strategic plans, and they were all boring. Well, this one isn't. But obviously, one reason for this is that Clemens wasn't there. But another one is that all of these meetings were theoretical. We were discussing things that people would like to do and how feasible they were, but none of these things have ever been done so far. Now, when I look at the strategic plan, goal 1 is sitting to my left. Achieved. Goal 2, elevating the research profile and academic visibility of the Institute. I don't think I need to argue that.
Yeah, look at Pam, achieved.
Goal 3, me and my 2 colleagues are sitting here. And goal 4, building a vibrant intellectual community. I think several ones of us have been to an outstanding lecture 2 weeks ago where we all felt a vibrant intellectual community. Goals achieved.
And there will be a reception afterwards with adult beverages. Yes.
I'm sorry, this just broke my train of thought.
You're welcome.
Well, so congratulations and thank you.
Thank you. Alison.
There's much to say, of course, but as I look around this room, this is such a wonderful moment after so many of us have been online exclusively in various contexts for so long. To be here in this room, I just think much of what the Nanovic is the people who are here, the wonderful students whom I see, the wonderful faculty. And new faces on the staff, relatively, and some more new than others, some newer than others, but wonderful to my heart to see Monica Caro, to see Mel, to see Anna, to see Grant, to see lovely people just united here who are also part of the Nanovic, and Clemens. We're all just so excited about your leadership. So it's a really great moment, and to be here is very, very moving and meaningful. So
thank you so much, Alice. Thank you. We have all these lovely fellows, right? Just a few exceptions, but lovely ones. Pam, the final word to Pam to Freiburg.
Oh goodness, the final word. Well, first of all, thank you for including an outsider, but I already feel that I am part of this wonderful academic community, so I really thank you for the invitation and the warm welcome. And I would just say that as someone who works both as a historian and an anthropologist, right? So I worked on Europe past and present. I mean, it's such a wonderful laboratory for the questions that you are asking in the strategic plan and the perspectives that you're employing. And it's really very bold, and I'm very excited to follow how it unfolds in these coming years. So again, thank you for including me in your community.
Thank you so much, Pam, and you're invited to the reception afterwards. But thank you so much. So words of thanks. First, Bob Nanovic. So on page 2 of the strategic plan, he asked me, who are they? Well, this is Bob himself and his wife Liz, and we owe the Nanovic Institute to them. It was started in 1992, and so we have high hopes for a jubilee next year. Thank you to them. Jim McAdams was with us. He had to leave. He was the director for 16 years. And we just see in Germany what happens when a leader steps down after 16 years. There's a lot of vacuum happening. So we owe a lot to Jim McAdams. And thank you to Scott, who had to leave to be with his All Holiness. We cannot compete with that. But he was very supportive as the dean, bringing the Nanovic Institute into the Kiel School. Thank you to all the fellows. Thank you, of course, to my colleagues at the Nanovic Institute, some of whom have been mentioned already in name, Mel and Monica and Anna and Becca and Grant and Bruna. Did I forget anyone? Of course. And we also thank Tim, who helped with the hybrid format of this event. It's 4:15. I was told that the reception starts at 4:15, which is a Navarre catering outside of the Nanovic Forum. And so this is the Nanovic seminar room. We moved to the Nanovic Forum, and if you have any doubt who owns this school, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let's hope for a good future. Thank you for coming.